In the previous video, we saw a race condition where the game mode event begin play loads a save file from disk, and then the player and container actors inventory component has an event begin play, and then that tries to load the inventory from the save file that's stored in memory in the game mode. But sometimes in release mode, number 2 happened before number 1, so the inventories didn't load properly. In this video, we're going to take a look at fixing this properly so that number 1 always happens before number 2. This is the event begin play of the game mode. You can see that I've just plugged in a sequence to print some text out so we can see what's going on. Got a start, a loading that's going to be after a delay, and that's where all the loading happens. We get the data from the disk and we set up the various objects that we need for the game to save the inventory and also the spawn points of the player. Then third in the sequence, we've got a begin play end just to show when all of that has finished. The save data level variable is where everything gets saved. And then the inventory component, begin play, now has its own print text start. Then the code runs that actually loads the inventory and does some various other bits and pieces. And then finally we do a inventory begin play end print text. Okay, so let's play this and just have a look. Now, if we look at this, we can see that the begin play start happens, then the end, but the loading actually happens last after the 3 containers in this map, and the player inventory does its start and end. So for some reason, that loading is actually after the other 2 bits. We've also got an error in the third person player character, which we'll take a look at later. So going back to the event begin play, if we wire up code that runs directly instead of calling the delay, even though the delay is set at 0, you can see that now continues in the same order. So that actually shows that just putting in a delay, even if time 0, causes it to appear later, and that sequence moves on to the next one, which I didn't realize would happen. But I am assuming that's a similar thing that happens with loading the data from disk, and it pushes it to the end. Now we're going to add some code so that this will always happen in the right order. So I'll just rewire up the delay and change that to 5 seconds. Then we can check that it definitely works if this loading takes a long time, that the inventories will still load properly. Now we're going to add a new variable. It's going to be a boolean. We'll have is loaded. So that will get set to true when the loading is finished so that we can know that we can load if we get to the point when we're ready. Then we're going to add an event dispatcher called onLoadComplete. So things can listen to that and respond when the loading has finished. Okay, so we'll just scroll to the right and find where it all finishes. We'll drag out the is loaded and we'll call set. We'll just wire that up and then set is loaded to true. Then right after that, we can call the event dispatcher onLoadComplete so that anything listening can respond to that. Here we have the updated code for the inventory component. So we've got the get game mode, which we cast to the third person game mode. And we set that to a cache game mode object, which will be one of the variables down here. So that just means we can reuse it. We don't have to do the cast each time because that can be quite expensive. Then we test the is loaded property, and if that is set to true, we can go ahead and just printed text to show that we're doing inventory direct, because that means we can load straight away because the game mode has already loaded the file. If not, then we're going to bind to the onLoadComplete event dispatcher and call a new onLoaded event, and then we'll print inventory event. Then after that, we actually load the inventory by calling this method, and then we resize the arrays and just bind to some events. Okay, so if we play this, we can see that the game mode start end happens as before, and then all the inventory begin ends happen. Then 5 seconds later, the loading of the game mode kicks in, and then we get the 4 inventory events. So now the container has its item. If we drag that over to the inventory, if we stop the game and restart, now if we just wait 5 seconds for it to load and run back to the inventory, you can see that the inventory is saved, the container no longer has the item, and the player has the item instead. One issue we've got now is if you do go to a chest too early within the 5 seconds, you can see that none of the inventories have loaded properly, so the arrays haven't been initialized. Player's inventory is completely empty. We wait the 5 seconds and look again. Now everything looks okay. So obviously we've got to fix that because we need to make sure either you're far enough away that that will never happen, or somehow pause the game initially before you can get to one of the chests. Now if we stop the game, we got this error. So we're actually going to have a look at this error now, because this actually is related to the same thing. Here you can see that in the third person game mode, we're trying to move the player to a safe spawn point, and that is erroring. The issue there is the code in the player character is running for the third person game mode has read the spawn save point from the disk. So we need to fix that next. Here we've got the event begin play of the third person character. You see it does a few things as we load the character, and then one of the last things before you add the input mappings is it tries to move the player to the save spawn point. And that gets the data from the game mode, sets the actor location so that you are where you last were when you saved the game. Okay, so let's fix this code in the same way so that we make sure that the third person game mode is ready for us to get this data. So we're going to get one of the game modes and cast it to our third person game mode. Then we'll check the is loaded property. Then we can do a branch from that. And then if that value is set to true, we can immediately move the player to the save spawn point, as the game mode is already loaded and ready for that. So if we play this now, you can see that we start here, but we're staying on the player start and we're not moving over to the save point because the game mode still has this 5 second delay on it. So now we're going to bind to the onload complete event dispatcher of the game mode. Then if the isLoad is false, we bind to that, and then we raise a new custom event. We can call that onloaded. And just wire in another node for the move player to save spawn point. Finally, we wire up the onload complete to the add input mapping logic so that we can still move after all of this has finished. Okay, let's have a look at what happens now when we've got the player start on the right and the spawn point on the left. So we start in the player start on the right initially, and then 5 seconds later we jump over to the spawn point, which isn't great because you don't want the player to see anything until you're in the correct place. Let's just take a look at what happens if we remove this 5 second delay. So we'll just change that back to 0 and then play this. Let's see what happens now. So here we pretty much immediately appear in the correct place, but you obviously can't rely on this because different computers might be slower at loading these save files, and you might get the delay building up over time if your game is particularly large. My fix to this is going to create a widget called W_black screen that just has a canvas panel and a border. Got a brush color of black, and you've got to make sure you set the anchor to fill the screen. Make sure all the offsets are set to 0. Then in the third person character, right after the event begin play, I create the widget and I'd set it to a local variable and add it to the viewport. Then after we have loaded and responded either to the event or the boolean being true, then we can use the variable we've saved for the widget, remove that from the parent. Then right after that, we call the add input mapping. So now if we play this, we're hoping to be in the green save point on the left, not the player start on the right. So we just wait the 5 seconds and then the black screen disappears and we're in the correct place. And when I search the chests now, the chests and the player both have the correct contents. The other thing about this is if you try and run forwards before the black screen has disappeared, you don't move anywhere. You can only move after the widget has disappeared. Now going to tidy up all of this code. So in the third person game mode, I'm just going to wire the event begin play directly to the loading and remove the sequence and the sort of before and end. So that looks like that. There's one final fix to be done to the game mode, because if we go down this code line where there is no save game file, we just have to put in the same code here, set the boolean to true, and call the onload complete event dispatcher. Finally, we'll tidy up the inventory component code. So I'm just going to get rid of the multiple sequences here and wire in the code to load the inventory. For now, I will keep the print text statements as to whether it loaded the inventory directly or via the event, just so I can see what's going on as I develop the game further. So now if we play the game, we can see that it loads immediately and all the inventories go down the direct route, because that's what I found before when we were in debug mode. It only flipped over when we were in release mode. But now those delays shouldn't matter, because we will still load in the right order. Here we go, so all the inventories are working as they should be. Okay, that's the end of this video. Please like and subscribe, and I hope to see you again soon.